First is trade fairs. So if you're selling to China or you're buying from China, visit the biggest trade fairs that are in your industry, both at home as well as overseas. China today is probably the biggest location for exhibition and trade fairs in general, and I would very much recommend for any SME wishing to sell to China or to buy from China to visit those trade fairs here to get a really good sense for what type of counterparties there are. That's the second step. Who are your counterparties? You want to know whether it's a state-owned company or a privately owned company. You want to understand what their vision is in the business and whether their capital is strong enough to be a partner for long-term business, because number one, you want to know who your partner is. And number two, you need to set up legal documentation for that as well. So legal documentation can either mean a framework, so I have a cooperation contract with you, and that's for a year or two or three, and goes on a renewal basis. But these are things to talk about. The other is individual bilateral contracts that you set up, and depending on the payment terms that you agree. In some industries, it's normal to have basic telegraphic transfer, and I pay some part upfront if I'm buying from a Chinese supplier, 20%, 30%, and I pay balance upon delivery or balance when I get the shipment documents, which give me legal entitlement to the goods. In bigger transactions, for commodities for instance, the standard rate of payment would be an LC, a letter of credit, that would run through my bank and my counterparty's bank and involves a lot of paperwork, but gives the additional security that LCs and especially the insurance that perhaps goes with those LCs bring. So my recommendation would probably be to go through those different steps, trade fairs, and checking out your partner with specific questions, comparing different partners in terms of their size and their ability to interact with you, the chemistry, the payment terms, and so on, and then moving to a legal framework, which many clients actually forget in the heat of the business and just say, I found a great product, I found a great producer, I'm just going to go ahead. I would always warn against that. And even if you did it, make sure it's only a test case, and that you as an entrepreneur, as an SME, say to yourself, okay, I'll do this once or twice, and then I'm going to set up the right contractual work. When we're talking about selling to China without having your own entity, either it's once again a bilateral agreement that I as a Canadian may have with a Chinese buyer, and we just have a bilateral agreement. There, the only thing to watch out for is, does your partner have the ability to pay you in Canadian or US dollars, right? Because again, the currency isn't convertible. You make a contract with them and he can only pay you in renminbi. First of all, they won't get out of the country because it's not convertible. And secondly, what are you going to do with renminbi in Canada? So the contract has to be fixed in US dollar terms, or Canadian or euro or whatever else you prefer. And your Chinese partner has to have the export license and the ability to pay you in US dollars. That's something to check straight off. Now that's in a bilateral situation that is perhaps something as an initial way to go is fine. But once you want to sell to more customers in the Chinese market and don't want to have your own entity, you would work through a distributor. And here my advice would be, on the one hand, always look at how you operate in other countries. So if you're based out of Canada and you're selling into the US or into Europe, do you have a distribution set up there? How did you choose your distributors there? And there's no reason to do it any other way in China. The difference in China that you'll find is because it's such a vast country, there's no one who can do everything. What is critical in China distribution setup is finding the right partner for the right location, for the right product, for the right customer groups. And anybody who tells you that they can cover every province and every product and every customer group, I wouldn't believe. I'd always be honest with the partner and say, okay, where are you? What are your strengths? You're based in South China, so you're doing, thin outerwear or sportswear. Let's work on that, and you fix a contract accordingly. And the contract should be delineated very clearly, regionally, by product and by customer, and always limited by time as well. If, however, you find that you need to work with multiple distributors, then of course at some point you need to consider, is there one main distributor who's managing the other distributors, which is perhaps a way you want to go. Otherwise, you want to manage all of those distributors. And there again, the Hong Kong company can come into play with a very low capital investment and very minimal management. You have an entity which you use to manage your various distributors, not only in China, but throughout. So answering your question, that doesn't necessitate you to set up your own entity in China with all the requirements that we spoke about. You can manage your distributors, people who you sell goods to and they sell to their customers. But again, I would say make sure you have gone through a strict process of finding the right partner and you have the legal framework drawn up for it that you review constantly and that you're making your partners aware of. It should be win-win, but at the same time, I would push for the rights that I have as an SME selling to China, which is, protection of my brand, my trademark, my IP, my access to customers. So if you sell to a distributor, I would always say make sure the distributor shares with you the database of his customers, so you know whom you're actually selling to, right? And there are other points that go into such a contract, but those would be the main elements I would mention.